Hello, everyone. This is Barry Melanson, and I'm here with Eric Oscarson, the CEO of our subsidiary, CPA.com, to speak to you again about the Small Business Payroll Protection Program, which is front and center of so many people's agendas today, including many of your clients and obviously virtually all of the firms in this country. And what we're going to have is a conversation today about a lot of the things that have transpired in really the last 48 hours. Eric and I recorded a video earlier in this week, and Eric will talk a little bit about that. But a lot of the things that we said in there actually come true. But now we're in the implementation stage, and there's a lot of confusion, a lot of questions by a lot of well-intentioned people. And we're going to sort of walk you through that. And let me just start with a context point. What we have is a $350 billion program targeted on small business. Really, nothing like this has ever been done in the history of the United States. We've seen industry verticals that have been part of so-called bailout programs and the like. And this is an attempt by the Congress and the administration to really support small business, which is critical to the U.S. economy during a very difficult time. And we all know the statistics with about 10 million unemployed people today. And the vast majority of those people in the last 2 weeks have come from the small business sector. Not all, but a vast majority. And the intent of this program is to have provided funding for businesses with under 500 employees to fund their payroll up to a maximum of $10 million, to fund their payroll and a few other operating costs for essentially this period of shutdown, which is targeted at 8 weeks. And getting from that intent to the actual funding of these programs, which will, in all likelihood, for a very high percentage of people, turn to a grant, is a huge undertaking. It's a huge undertaking by the CPA community, by the small business, by the banking community, by the government, and even the payroll processors. Those 5 players are the key players in this process. And there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of confusion that's out there. And we're going to try to help you put that into context as we talk about it today. And as we do this, I would ask all of you as trusted advisors to be thinking about predominantly the employees. And when you take sole proprietors and the employees of businesses with less than 500 people, you're talking about something in the neighborhood of 80 to 85 million people in this country. And we need to put all of us, all 5 of the players in this process that I just mentioned, we need to be thinking about those individual players. That's my advice to all of us in this process. I've said it to the banks. I've said it to government. We've said it to the payroll processors. And I'm saying it to the firms today, that we need to walk in those individual shoes who are either worried about whether they'll have a job or already don't have a job. And this program is about small business, keep these people employed. And as a result, when the green light goes and we can start to rebuild this economy, the connection between those individual small businesses and their employees will be intact. And therefore, the startup period will be shorter. And everything we're doing right now, we ought to be thinking about those individuals. And so, Eric, with that context, let's talk about some of the confusion that's out in the marketplace today that, again, is being handled by people with the best of intentions, but it's just the complexity of getting this up and running as quick as Secretary Mnuchin has said, which is, I want it up and running by Friday. So let's talk about that.
Well, thanks, Barry. And that was very well said. I mean, there are these 5 major groups that are working so hard at implementing the Paycheck Protection Program. And a lot has evolved over the past couple of days. We've had countless discussions with those 5 groups that you've mentioned. So what I'll share right now is our current understanding. First, on Monday, we talked about the application form, and we talked about the expansion of lenders. And both of those things did occur on Tuesday when Treasury came out with the additional guidance. So there is now a 2-page application program form, and the lenders have been expanded to include all banks, all credit unions, close to 11,000 lending institutions in the U.S., and there's also going to be some fintech lenders. So those were great steps that the Treasury took. We applauded them. And really where we're at right now, working with the lending community and the payroll providers, as well as the government officials, is understanding a lot of the particulars behind that application form. What are going to be the required documents needed for that form? And I can tell you right now, there's wide disparity. The banks are working hard at trying to figure this out, just like everybody else. They want it to be simple, a simple and effective process. So they're trying to understand what documents are required. We're working with them, with the payroll community, on trying to determine what would be the best data set. And we've done some good work on that. And there are some groups right now that have identified a core set, what we're calling a thin file that can be attached to that application form. And I could talk more about it, but maybe some comments from you.
Yeah, and the thin file point, I think everybody agrees with. It's, can we get this as simple as we can, as quick as we can? Now, you say, well, there's the forms that came out, and that was pretty simple. But then there's the documentation process. And if you're in charge of a bank, it's a legitimate concern. Yes, in 8 weeks, the vast majority of this will convert into a grant, but some won't. And then there's going to be a piece, even if it's 5% of $350 billion, that there's going to be a piece that is going to be a loan. And so what do I need to be doing today to make sure that as a banker, I'm protected from that standpoint? There's another component of this that's, I think, very important. There are a whole host of SBA programs. And most SBA programs don't have a thin file. That's a different type of lending process. And some of your firms maybe have been working with this. And there are, some of the banks have been working with this in the past. And so when you see SBA affiliated with this, there's this sort of mindset that clicks in that this is like all those other SBA programs. And there's a disaster relief program that's big time right now that is out there for businesses that have been affected in certain ways. And while it's technically part of the SBA, and that's how the bill was passed, the execution of this is a different program. And it doesn't come with all of the same thinking and the same execution that other SBA programs are about. And so as banks have been trying to gear up to this, I think that becomes part of the discussion point. And as the government has tried to communicate, that becomes part of the discussion point. And I think we all have to have a bit of patience and understanding that this is a little bit different, but it's also sort of a first time in it. And I think that adds to it. But the quick, short file is a very important point. Eric?
Yeah, and Barry, just to expand a little bit on what we're thinking that may be some of the, the required documents. And it really comes down to the payroll data set. And we're thinking there can be a master payroll file that will include the information needed to calculate that maximum loan amount. And that's what's needed, that's needed to be known as part of the application process. And there's some critical tax forms that it looks like that will go along with that. And that's the 940 and 941 quarterly filings. So a master tax, a master payroll data set, along with those two forms, could be the essential part of what is attached to that application form. And we're working with the payroll community on this, the payroll coalition that we put in place. So the AICPA-led coalition that we put in place about a week ago. They're very interested in seeing how they can help solve this. And we're talking to the lenders and trying to understand how best we can get that information to them, working with the 44,000 firms.
And Eric, just as you described that, you described it as sort of what's necessary for the loan amount. And that's technically what it is up front. But in 8 weeks, you document that as the small business that you've spent, let's say, the entire amount that you got up front on payroll and rent and utilities and mortgage payments, which are the primary elements that are covered, and it converts to a grant. And so at that point, there's no more, loan that exists. And so it's this trade-off of documentation for a loan versus what becomes a grant. And of course, we're all sensitive. The government is sensitive. All the players are sensitive that we do everything we can to minimize uh, fraud or inappropriate grants being delivered in this particular environment. And so that's the sort of rub as to how this was structured with the best of intentions. And how do you do that quickly? And again, all eyes are on doing this as quickly as possible. We have given to Treasury a list of 7 different questions or guidance points that we think are needed and the suggested answers to those. And we expect soon that we hope that the Treasury will be able to move that guidance out into the banking community. And obviously, we will make it available to you as well as this moves to the next stage in trying to speed this up. And even as Eric pointed out, the 940s and the 941s, for instance, one of the points we made is that instead of getting that through the IRS, that could get all bogged down and slow things up. The IRS wants to be supportive. The IRS is part of this discussion. But, millions of requests could actually bog down systems from that standpoint as well. And so it's really about how do you sort of move all of these moving parts in sort of a coordinated way to get it through the system as quickly as possible. And Eric, there's another thing. Even though there's 10,000 potential, authorized lenders here, some banks will choose not to participate in that.
Yeah, well said, Barry. And let me just backtrack to one point about not putting an undue burden on the IRS. That you were referring to the 8821 transcript request, and that's something that the AICPA has stated we don't think is needed, and it seems that the government officials are in agreement. So we're trying to drive a simple and effective process with our advocacy positions. On the comment about the eligible lenders, and also just a broader comment about what's happening out there right now in the marketplace. So some banks are trying to determine, are they going to participate? Other banks have decided that they are participating, and they're beginning to get their arms around what they think the required documents may be. So some banks are putting a long list out. And we've seen that. Other banks are putting a shorter list out. And what we do know is in the next couple of days, there'll be more guidance coming from Treasury. And we're advocating for some standardization on what the document requirements are, because we know that will help drive the simple and effectiveness goal. And we know that will also, help our firms support their clients. So today, there's firms, getting their arms around the CARES Act, the Paycheck Protection Program. Banks are doing that. Everybody's listening to what's coming out from the government officials. So, long story short, there will be more guidance. The clarity will start to occur, and everyone is marching towards trying to get these application platforms stood up by Friday. One additional point just related to the processing of these applications. That's another thing that the banks are working on. Some are thinking about doing it in an automated fashion. They're just not thinking about it. That's what they want. They want an automated form because that's the only way they'll be able to handle the volume. So we've seen some demos of some capabilities related to that. So that's another activity that's underway. And you got to look at how much work's being done. Everybody's working hard. Those 5 entities that you outlined, Barry, to get this stood up to support the millions of small businesses.
And I think it's important to, as you talk about some lending institutions thinking about a lot of data and others less. That's why we think it's so important. And we've communicated this to all of the players, to the banking community, the government, et cetera, is that we want a specific set of guidance so that we don't have this disparity, because that's not fair to the small businesses. That's not fair to those employees of the small businesses. Let's get it down into what is really required, what makes a difference based on how the program was passed by Congress, and sort of keep it simple as it possibly can be. And that's really our goal in this environment. And I would say that every firm, and I know some firms are saying, should I be helping in this or should I not? Every firm has small business clients. And this is our role. We ought to be helping. If we think about those employees, we ought to be helping. And I would say the same thing to the banks. And Eric and I just talked about some banks might do it. Banks support their communities. This is about supporting Main Street businesses that are the heart and soul of so many communities, every community in this country. And so we got to find a way for everybody to be playing in this particular space. That's the right answer. And I would tell you, by just the amount of energy that's happening in particularly Treasury and getting this program moving, everybody from Secretary Mnuchin all the way down believes, I think, that as well, because it's about how you get that money into the market and into the economy as quick as we can. We have not touched about one issue that I want to just call your attention to, and we'll wrap this up. And Eric, I'll give you any last thoughts. But we haven't raised the issue in detail here about the agent issue and whether you're signing the form. There's a lot of pros and cons. I think the number one issue is you got to be structured in your engagement letter as to what you're really doing. We have a lot of guidance on that. There's going to be continued guidance coming on that particular issue. There's some considerations, just like banks are going through some considerations. There's considerations for firms related to that particular element. It's not something that can be covered in a couple of minutes. And we will continue to provide that governance, or that guidance, I should say, to you in that environment. So, Eric, any closing thoughts?
My closing thoughts would just be that it is such an important time for us to work together, with this broader ecosystem and the government officials, the banking community, the payroll processors, the CPA firms. Those three groups working with their small business clients will enable the government, in essence, to make this payroll for small businesses over the next 8 weeks. So that's one thing I would keep in mind, is let's partner. And the other thing that we all need to do is to communicate with one another, to understand that everybody's getting their arms around this in real time. And some people are maybe ahead of others. So have understanding for that, and we'll continue to share these updates. And I've been hearing from so many firms about how they are really doing everything they can to support their clients in this time, Barry. So the firms are really standing up, and we just look forward to working with them as this all evolves.
And I've heard that as well. And I would say, I hope all of you who are watching this and part of the profession are proud of the fact that as this key component of our economy, the small business community, the effort that the profession did, that we led through a coalition to really talk about making this a grant program and to get the type of funding that's necessary to keep that small business connected. And as we work through the next few days and maybe the next week or so to get it actually out there and funded, the key message is, yes, some small businesses are going to need to bring back employees. That's a good thing. Bring back employees, and the government is going to help those compensation elements through a grant program. That's a good thing. And it's really such a bridge program to get small business through this time. And I think we just all need to be rallying around that. And I hope that every one of you are as committed to that individual employee out there, that we're all trying to address what they're going through right now. And that's so critically important. Thank you for listening to this. We're going to keep you updated and keep the information and questions flowing. And everyone is doing the best they can to get as many answers as possible, as quickly as possible.